I got each Paragon to degree 100 and saw how far they could get on their own. We started with the Apex Plasma Master. We got it at the start of round 70 and watched it destroy the rounds. The second Bloons got in its range, it cleared the screen with its bouncing pumpkins. BFBs and Moabs could take a couple hits before being destroyed, but that would still only take about a second. I mean, even the round 80 ZOMG was popped in the blink of an eye. So let's fast forward a bit to round 95, the first round that there are tons of DDTs. Obviously, he popped them very quickly, but what was interesting was that everything behind the DDT he was shooting would pop before the initial target. This was because the plasma balls would bounce off the walls and re-hit the DDTs in reverse order, popping them from back to front. It actually did this with every type of Bloon, but it was most noticeable with these and the fortified ZOMGs on round 97. But that brings us to round 100. The bad made it all the way to the APM before getting popped, and the BFBs actually made it around the first turn. Still though, they were popped well before the exit. But now it's time for the free play rounds. Each round, the Bloons get faster and stronger, so it'll be fun to see them get slightly farther and farther as the rounds go on. At first, it wasn't very noticeable, but round 118 has tons of fortified DDTs that made it well past the first turn. And round 119 comes in with 3 bads, all of which made it significantly farther than the round 100 one. The funny thing was that we popped the second bad well before the first, and the third made it farther than the other two, as its ZOMGs made it to the water triangle before getting popped. Pretty soon, even ZOMGs were turning the first couple corners, like on round 132, where fortified ones made it to the top right of the map. It was only a matter of time before something took us out, and what finally did us in was the fortified bat on round 140. The Apex Plasma Master just couldn't do enough damage, as it was the entire bed that leaked, not just the insides. So round 140 is its limit, but we can all agree that this map isn't the best for the APM, as there aren't any walls for its balls to bounce off of. So I did it again on Sulphur Springs, a map pretty much made for the Apex Plasma Master. I put it down in the little nook so all of its attacks could bounce around the track repeatedly and ran it back. Quickly, we made it to round 140, where the bads didn't stand a chance. We popped the fortified one about halfway through the track and the normal one at the end of the small initial loop. From here, bads started spawning much more regularly, but they usually weren't a problem because any Bloons at the start of the track would take insane amounts of damage if the Dartagon was shooting something farther along. This was nice, as normally a tower leaks the second or third bad of a round because they weren't able to get around to attacking it until it was too late. A round that countered this was 169, where the rounds started with a bad and didn't send any afterwards. This made it so the APM cleared the screen pretty quick and only had the bad to shoot at, so there was a decent amount of time that he wasn't shooting at all, lowering the DPS on the bad by quite a bit, and he was just barely able to pop the insides on the last loop. But round 170 was even harder. Even though there were 2 bads to shoot at, they must have been perfectly spaced to just barely live through everything, as the insides of the second one were able to get out every time I tried. So round 170 is the APM's limit. Up next is the Glaive Dominus. His main attack was one-shotting any Bloon that got in his range. What was fun to watch though were when blimps came on screen and we got to see the Glaive Dominus's knockback rang, where it pushed back whatever blimp came on screen and its explosion would take out a layer. Like in round 80, where we got to see it explode the ZOMG down to BFBs, then Moabs, and finally ceramics before getting popped. I knew it would destroy the round, I just didn't think it'd be that satisfying. Fast forward to round 95, where we face a ton of DDTs, and they couldn't even make it to his orbiting rangs. The Glaive Dominus was able to throw his knockback rangs fast enough to keep them basically at the start of the track until they were fully popped. This was kind of the case for everything, even the round 100 bad. While we couldn't slow it down, the Glaive Dominus was able to pop the outer layer in just a few seconds and push back the insides a bit before popping everything. This stalling continued into the hundreds, as nothing could really push on this guy. The fortified DDTs on 138 made it the farthest, as they sometimes would get past the knockback attack, but even they got popped once they were inside his orbiting rangs. But that brings us to the fortified bad. It actually made it around the first 2 turns before its outer layer was popped, but the explosion did enough damage to pop the DDTs at the same time as the outer layer, so the Glaive Dominus was able to stall the ZOMGs and pop them pretty easily. This couldn't continue forever though, as normal bads started making it even farther than this one in the 160s, with their insides routinely making it around the pool of water up top and getting popped on their way to the bottom of the track. If the Bloons make it past this section, it's almost a guaranteed leak. And that brings us to round 172, where 4 purple whales came swimming down the track. The first one was pretty easy to deal with, but the next 3 got so far that we had to pop some of the ceramics inside with lucky glaive bounces. It worked for a little bit, but the DDTs inside the final bad got through. Onto the Nautic Siege Core, aka the Subagon. This one was fun because it has global range, so I built it at the back of the map and placed 002 dart monkeys around the track. These guys will give it vision and camo detection everywhere, but not do nearly enough damage to affect this guy's max round. Just like the other Paragons, this guy was popping everything right away. The only difference was he could see the start of the track, so for many rounds nothing really made it on screen. Even the round 100 bad was popped before we could really see it. In fact, the first time this wasn't the case was round 140, where the fortified bad actually made it to the first turn. We still popped it incredibly fast, but it was nice to see something actually live long enough to get on screen. From here on out, bads would occasionally spawn and they would tank the attacks for a short while, letting us see the Bloons before they got popped. It was weird rooting for the Bloons to get farther so I could actually see what was going on, but I guess that's a good thing because the Nautic Siege Core was doing so well. Similar to the Glaive Dominus though, the 160s were where things started to get far. The ZOMGs were tanky enough to make it to the first or second turn, and the bads would get about halfway through the track before being popped. It was round 172 where I wanted to try something though. Once we popped everything but the final 3 bads, I activated the sub's final strike ability. This does massive damage but has a 15-second lead up time where the Subagon doesn't attack, so we can really only use it when slow Bloons are on screen. The timer counted down and it basically one-shot the whales when it hit 0. Normally it takes us half the map or more to pop them, but this ability took them out in under a second, and the leftover radiation made the next round a piece of cake. The reason I tested this was to see how long the radiation would last, as it let us pop bads super easily, and if it lasted until the next ability I would use it all the time. Unfortunately, by the time it went away we weren't even halfway through the cooldown, so we can really only use final strike as a last resort. This last resort came on round 177 as we couldn't pop everything. The 4 bads were just slightly too much, so we ran it back and used final strike when it was only the bads remaining. These missiles made contact in the top right of the map, one-shotting the first 2 bads, and the other 2 quickly melted in the radiation. Then we went back to business as usual. Round 178 didn't have a bad, so we handled it pretty easily, and round 179 only had 1. That being said, it was hidden behind a ton of fortified ZOMGs that we were struggling to deal with. If we just left the Subagon attacking, it could pop all the ZOMGs, but the bad would get through. And if we switched it to strong, the ZOMGs would leak. Our only hope was a final strike on the bad at the very end of the track, but it just barely wasn't off cooldown in time. We had a couple attempts where the countdown got down to 1 or even 0, but the bad snuck off the screen right before the missiles came down. So this is its limit. Onto the Navarch of the Seas. I built this guy as far left as I could in the top pool of water, and he started popping the Bloons faster than the Subagon. If they weren't instantly hooked, his planes would pop them before they were visible. I mean, even the round 100 bad barely made it on the screen. In fact, it was so dominant that we'll go straight to round 140, where we could have one-shot the bads with his ability, but instead we let it play out to see how much damage the Navarch truly does. The planes alone gave the whale a bandage just a couple seconds into the map, but once it got in range of the Navarch's main cannons, it was over. These triple turrets tore the bad apart, not even letting it get to the first turn. This continued until the 180s, when things finally started getting a decent way through the track. ZOMGs and smaller were still being hooked in, but the bads were starting to pose a problem. On round 182, all 4 bads made it past the first 2 turns, and we know this devolves quickly from the previous Paragons. The nice thing is that the Navarch hasn't gotten to use its cannons on the right side of its ship much, because not many Bloons make it far enough along the track to get to that side of the boat. It really only happens on the second turn or when Bloons make it to the water. The water was pretty rare though, as this didn't happen until rounds 198 and 199, where some ZOMGs made it to the right side of the Navarch and all the cannons were shooting, popping them very quickly. But then round 200 was here. This is the farthest a Paragon has been all day, and we had to take on 2 fortified bads. We popped the outer layer of the first one about 2/3 of the way through the track, but then a DDT inside zoomed to the exit. So now it's time to start using its ability. With it, we pulled in both fortified bads and moved on. Luckily, this ability has a super short cooldown, so I don't really have to worry about it not being available other than its 2 use limit per round. So I figured we'd just use it on fortified bads because they've proven we can't pop those even when they're alone on the screen. So that's what I did, and it worked flawlessly until normal bads got too tanky to take out in time, which was on round 226. There were 2 fortified bads that we hooked in and 3 normal ones we had to pop with his regular attack. But even with messing around with his targeting and several retries, something always leaked. Maybe we could have RNG'd our way through it, but we were never really that close to popping everything. Still though, round 226 is a solid score. Shifting gears, we have the Goliath Doom ship. the most expensive Paragon in BTD6. I got it near the middle of the map and let it run. Unfortunately, because I did all these runs on chimps to keep things super consistent, we don't have access to Wing Monkey, so hopefully Circle and Figure Infinite will do. Just like the others, it was popping everything before they even made it on screen, including the round 100 bad, so let's jump to round 140. Here, the fortified bad only made it about halfway to the first turn. An absolute dominating performance from the Asagon, and it was fun to see how much more damage it did when it flew right over the bad. This dumpstering continued for quite some time, as nothing really turned the corner until the 160s, when the insides of bads would live just long enough to turn. They obviously made it farther and farther each round until 181, where we actually leaked some ceramics. Not to worry though, this was a super easy fix by changing its flight pattern from Circle to Figure Infinite, and our Asagon did significantly more damage, cruising through the rounds once again. The next time we leaked was on round 198, where we let the bads get too far and tons of blimps marched towards the exit. This was also an easy fix, as I just used the Doomship's ability to pop the first 3 bads of the round, making the rest of it very easy and let the ability come mostly off cooldown. I wanted to use this ability again to get past 199, but I knew we'd need it for round 200. So we let the airship attack away a few times until we finally passed the round with no abilities. This let us open round 200 with carpet bombs, allowing us to pop the bad layer and DDTs of the first one early. Then we used the carpet bombs again to deal massive damage to the second bad, as well as take out what's left of the insides of the first one. And this barely let us pop everything before we leak. From here on out, we used an ability or two on just about every round, especially if there was a fortified bad in there. But what eventually got us was round 216. I tried over and over again, dealing as much damage as I could with the carpet bombs and a little bit of ace micro, but I could never pop both bads. I'd like to see an ace god like Duke do this to see what its actual limit is, but for me, it was around 216. Next up, we have the Magus Perfectus. Whether it was the laser or the Phoenix attacking, the balloons were kept at the start. Even the bad was popped right away. The funny thing though, was that I forgot to enable selling in this, so we're rocking Geraldo and a Mib along with the Magus. Luckily, these two won't change a thing, so it's just something extra to look at. Now, I know the smart thing to do is use the Magus's laser attack whenever there are only bads or ZOMGs on screen to refill his mana, while the slow balloons pose no threat of leaking, but the rounds are so easy, I just let him run free for a while. And by for a while, I mean until round 165, where his laser attack was on and tons of fortified DDTs blew past him in just a couple seconds. Luckily, we were able to pop all these on the second try with just a little bit of the Phoenix, even though we were super low on mana going into the round. Then, once the DDTs were popped, we refilled a ton of his mana on the bad. This only lasted a few seconds as more DDTs spawned, forcing us to Phoenix again. But this cleared the screen of everything except for 3 bads, which we used to fill our mana pool before popping them. And I learned my lesson. For the rest of the run, I'd micro a wizard to always have plenty of mana to give us the best chances for each round. This got harder and harder as time went on, but the difficulty really jumped once we got to round 190. Here, we actually had to fill up our mana pool and use his first ability, Arcane Metamorphosis, to beat the round. This ability does absurd damage, but completely drains his mana pool. This worked out great though, because it cleared the round of everything but a single bad, which we used to get our mana back. I thought Arcane Metamorphosis would carry us for a while, but then we came across the hardest round so far, 193. I tried forever to get past this round, and what eventually worked was something weird. We had a bit of Arcane Metamorphosis left over from last round. This took out tons of balloons at the start, but once it wore off, we were a bit weak. So I completely filled our mana pool with the laser, and once we capped out, I used Phoenix Explosion to spawn 10 zombie ZOMGs. This took out everything but the final bad, which we popped with a combination of the Phoenix and laser. From here, we used Arcane Metamorphosis basically every round, and this let us pop the rest of the 100s. But the 2 fortified bads in round 200 were just too much. No matter the combination of abilities, we always leaked something. So round 200 is the Magus's limit. On to the Ascended Shadow. This is the first Paragon in a long time that doesn't have global range, so for once we can see the balloons in the lower rounds. This doesn't really mean much because he still one-shot them when they got in range, but it was better than watching everything get popped off screen. My favorite early round was 100, where the ghostly sticky bomb one-shot the bad, including the insides, which I guess makes sense as it does over 30,000 damage. This kind of happened again on round 119, where it popped each bad with 2 sticky bombs, and they all went off before they got in range of his main attack. So he popped these faster than most other Paragons. This trend continued as on round 140 he popped the fortified bad before it could even make the first turn, and his flash bombs stunned the ZOMGs inside until they were popped too. Nothing was getting past this guy. This was par for the course until the 180s, when bads would make it around 2 to 3 turns. But still, anything smaller than a bad was just perma-stalled stalled until pop. Round 189 was a good example of this, as the bad made it about halfway through the track, but the second the layer popped, they were done for. And anything that came in range of the Ascended Shadow during this time was just collateral damage, but in a good way. But all good things come to an end, and for the Ninjagon, it was round 200. He just couldn't get through both outer layers in time, even with tons of sticky bombs, and something always managed to leak. But finally, we have the Master Builder. I got it as early as I could, which was around 73, so it could start stacking those attack speed buffs. You see, every round it attacks slightly faster until it maxes out at shooting 20 times a second, and I wanted it to hit this cap as early as possible. Additionally, I placed all the turrets right away to have them prepped for when we need their explosion. Luckily, we didn't need to do this for a long time. I mean, even the round 140 fortified bad was popped before the first turn. And just like the Ninjagon, the Master Builder was able to permastall everything inside until they were popped. Needless to say, we're going to be fine for a while. Similar to the other Paragons, the late 100s are where the difficulty really picked up. It was super nice that the Master Builder could stall ZOMGs and DDTs perfectly, but the bads started getting pretty far. On rounds 198 and 199, they made it all the way to the water before their outer layers were popped, but we still had two tricks up our sleeve. The first is aiming the laser sentry, which I started to do on round 200, and the second is to replace the turrets for massive explosions and better shooting spots. We almost beat round 200 first try with minimal effort, but the second bad got through. But after a couple tries, I was on top of aiming and replacing the sentries, and with this we managed to pop everything at the very end of the track and continue into the 200. I kept aiming the laser, and I moved all of our sentries back to the middle of the track to get ready for the next hard round. This turned out to be 208 as things kept leaking, but to get by we just needed to use our abilities as fast as possible and keep placing the turrets in the center. Kind of a basic solution, but one that I was overlooking earlier. But that brings us to round 210. A round with 3 normal bads and a fortified one. Even with spamming the abilities and focusing the fortified whale, we just weren't able to pop it before the exit. Everything else was under control, but this tanky layer was just too much. So round 210 is where this run ends. But there we have how far each degree 100 Paragon can get on cubism on chimps. If we made the perfect map for a Paragon, how far could they get? Well, let's start off with the Glaive Dominus. Probably the easiest Paragon to think of a good map for, as we're going to make the balloons circle around this guy as many times as possible while being in the range of his orbiting glaives the entire time. To make the map less boring, we added some sweet lights near the track, a flower to mark where the boomer should be placed, a nice little house, pond, trees, and a weird vine that's slowly taking over the map. Don't ask what it is, just know that it was a fun pattern to extend. But with all that out of the way, it's time to make a degree 100 Glaive Dominus. We started off with a boomer in the middle to handle the rounds, Geraldo off to the side so he could start leveling up, and farms in the bottom left. We needed to get tons of pops on our boomerang to max him out, so I thought it'd be fun to god boost a Glaive Lord to see how far he can go before turning him into a maxed out Paragon. Defending was very easy due to the map layout, and it let us get away with just a more glaives and a hot sauce potion until round 57, where we finally spent the money building our Glaive Lord. His orbiting rangs are quite a bit smaller than the Paragons, but they still sped up when Moabs and BFBs were in his range, meaning they were dealing damage. We continued farming away and forced Geraldo up to level 20 on round 71 so we could start placing Paragon totems. And with all the leftover money, we started buffing the Glaive Lord. We quickly gave him an Ultra Boost Engineer, a Permabrew Alchemist, and a Homeland Defense Village. I was debating leaving it at that so the Glaive Lord could get almost all the pops, but let's be honest, more buffs are more fun to watch. So in the 90s, we placed on a Primary Expertise Village, a Support True Sun God, a Super Brittle, a Call to Arms, and an Energizer. Then we just tech-botted the villages and the Engineer and let the Glaive Lord do his thing. He absolutely crushed the rounds with all these buffs, even popping the Fortified Bad on round 140 in under 2 laps around the track. This was pretty impressive, and we could even stop placing down Paragon totems because of how many pops he had. Fast forward to the 180s and things were getting pretty interesting. The loop was completely filled with fortified ZOMGs and BFBs, and the occasional cluster of DDTs would come screaming through. Luckily, nothing lived that long except for the bads, who were now making it over 5 laps around before their outer layer was even popped. This was definitely foreshadowing our Glaive Lord's demise. The 2 fortified bads that come on round 200 were just too much. The outer layer for each of these guys is 960,000 health, not to mention the fact that they're moving 3.98 times faster than normal. So they made it many times around the track, and it was the DDTs inside the second bed that got through and ended this run. The Glaive Lord had 328 million damage, but now it's time to make him a degree 100 Glaive Dominus. We sold everything, had over $11 million, and started building some boomerangs. We maxed out all the categories that give this guy power and had more than enough totems to make him a degree 100 Paragon. We hit play and watched him pop the first bad in just 4 loops around the track, the DDTs almost instantly, and we could basically permanently stall ZOMGs and below. Even without any support, this guy's much stronger than what we had before. This trend continued into the next round as the Glaive Dominus focused the bad in front and the ricocheting glaives would pop these smaller blimps behind it. This would cause them to catch up as they broke into smaller balloons, but the second they reached the main knockback glaive, they would stop in their tracks until they were popped down to nothing. This was amazing, but the balloons get stronger and faster with every round. By round 224, we faced 4 bads, 2 of which were fortified, and the second one made it 8 laps around the track and its DDTs a bit further. Fast forward a bit more and we were facing mostly bads. Take round 247 for example. Sure, there were plenty of DDTs and ZOMGs, but those were non-factors. What was actually scary were the 10 bads that took up the entire circle. The first fortified bad made it 10 laps around, and the ones after it made it even farther, as the Glaive Dominus wasn't able to focus them until after the first one was popped. Not to mention the DDTs inside blitzing out a couple laps before they got popped too. The writing was on the wall. Round 259 was the one that finally took down our degree 100 Glaive Dominus. Once again, there were 10 fortified bads, a mix of fortified and normal, that took up the entire map. The Glaive Dominus was putting in work, but it was the DDTs inside the final bad that took him out. Impressive that he managed to pop all the bad layers, but some balloons still got through. 259 rounds and about 1.7 billion damage on the Glaive Dominus. Not bad at all. Next, we have the Navarch of the Seas, aka the Boat Paragon, and we need to make a map just for him. My thought was pretty simple. Make a long, skinny track that loops around a body of water. We'll put the Navarch in the center of this, and it'll be skinny enough that all of the Paragon's cannons should be constantly hitting balloons, even if there are only a couple of bads on the track. Naturally, we put water in the bottom left so we could boat farm, and we left land everywhere else so that we could place Geraldo, some central markets, and Paragon totems. For no reason other than looks, I took up some valuable real estate in the top right. Here, I put a few buildings around a fountain to give a college campus vibe, with one of the buildings still under construction. Then I added a fun monkey-made island in the middle of the lake. This isn't just for looks though, it also serves as a great spot to put a discount village, which will make all of our merchantmen cheaper later on, and eventually a monkey city, which will increase how much money our bucks make per round. Then I just added some small details like pigeons, rocks, stickers, and for whatever reason, I played around with the removable objects and animations. Does this help us at all with our goal of making a degree 100 Navarch? No, but they were fun to play with as they just got added to the game when I was making this map. Anyway, with this we jumped into the game and started farming. This quickly snowballed into a lake full of boats and the land was full of farms and totems, but I ran into a problem. I couldn't decide which Buccaneer I wanted to God boost, so I just made the perfect Navarch on round 105 and tech botted him to use his ability whenever it was off cooldown. Unsurprisingly, this was instantly popping every balloon we came across. If the passive hooks were on cooldown, the planes were popping the blimps before they were even fully on screen. It was gross how fast we were flying through the rounds. If you didn't know better, you'd think it was a speedrun. And this continued for a long time. I mean, even on round 203, we popped the fortified bad in just over 1 lap. And they have to complete over 20 laps to reach the exit. It's clear that we're not even close to the end, so let's fast forward to round 301, where Moab class balloons have 93 times their normal health and move 6.98 times faster than usual. Here, the tech bot had the Navarch use its hook on the first 2 bads of the round, and the planes and cannons took it from there. Just 3 laps around the track, bad layers started popping and the DDTs inside were going crazy. Sure, some of them were getting grabbed right away by the passive hooks, but for the most part they just zoomed around a few times before the Navarch took them out. Unlike the Glaive Dominus, who had a very strong knockback effect, the Navarch is relying solely on its raw DPS and occasional hooks to take out the insides. The furthest a fortified bad made it though was 8 laps around, and the DDTs inside made it an extra 3 laps. This is already getting pretty scary, and it's clear that our speedrun was over. Now we're just hoping that the Navarch can hold on a little while longer. And boy did it ever. An hour and a half later, round 367 challenged our degree 100 Navarch of the Seas, and with it came an obnoxious amount of DDTs, ZOMGs, and a whopping 16 bads. most of which were fortified. And the Navark was able to take everything out except for the DDTs inside the final fortified bad. We had known this was coming for a while, as every time a bad was popped, the DDTs flew around the track many times, but it's crazy that it was the final bad of the round that took us out. Still though, the Navark got almost 17 billion damage and was able to pop Bloons for over 3 hours before they finally made it to the exit. And those Bloons had 192 times health and 8.3 times their normal speed. We're going to get every Paragon to degree 100 and see how far they can get. Not just that though, we're going to make the perfect map for them to maximize their damage. We'll start off by building an obnoxiously long track that goes from corner to corner several times. We'll leave some space in the middle for our Paragons to be placed and add some water in the dead center for our Navark of the Seas. Next, we just have to fill the bottom left side of the map with water so we can boat farm for both pops and money, and then surround the track with a few layers of hedges so our Apex Plasma Master has plenty of walls for his attacks to bounce off of. But this is our beautiful Paragon map. We booted it up, instantly got Geraldo down, and started farming. Because this map is so easy, we didn't need much to defend, so by round 20 we already had a bank and a second farm. It was here though that we got down a Buccaneer that will one day become our Navark of the Seas. He wasn't really needed, but I wanted to speed up the rounds for my own sake. But then we just farmed away, picking up a lead to gold and eventually transitioning from our bank to a Minneapolis on round 30. This accelerated our farm quite a bit, and before we knew it, we had a trade empire on round 39. Now it was time to spam merchantmen and watch the money come flying in. What's crazy is that this map is so easy that a 2-3-0 cannon ship was still plenty of defense for us to beat the rounds. We just had to use Geraldo's camo potion every once in a while to make sure he could pop the camos. That being said, we did upgrade our free dart monkey to a 4-2-0 juggernaut on round 42 just to speed up the rounds and get him some pops. This crushed the balloons and let us get our 20th flavored trades buck by round 53. This is great because not only does boat farming get us absurd amounts of cash, but also makes it very easy to max out the Navark, as each dollar generated by these guys counts as 4 pops. Anyway, by round 74 we had filled the top of the map with farms, the bottom of the map with boats, and in the middle we had a pirate lord and an ultra juggernaut. It was at this point that we spent about 60k to get Geraldo to level 20 so we could start placing down Paragon totems. These will be the limiting factor of how fast we can make our Paragons, so we better start now as we don't want to lose before we get all 7 of them to degree 100. I wasn't sure what Paragon to get first though. All I knew was that the Apex Plasma Master and the Navark would steal all the pops, making it difficult to make the next Paragon, so we had to think through the others. And then it dawned on me. We should make the Master Builder first because each round increases his attack speed by 10%. This does cap out at 600%, but getting him down early will make him reach this cap before we get to the super difficult rounds. Plus, we'll just place his sentries down near the end of the track, so he won't be stealing any pops unless the balloons make it past the Pirate Lord. On round 130, we placed down our 48th Paragon Totem, got down plenty of overclocks, maxed out the Paragon Slider, and built our first degree 100 Paragon of the day. I know we wasted some money doing this, but we're already in sandbox territory with how much cash we have, so that will not be an issue for the rest of the game. All we need to do is focus on placing a totem down every round, as that's what'll hold us back. And Twitch chat knows I am terrible at remembering to place these, so hopefully this run's different and I don't forget to place them too often. We replaced our farms and hit play. This Master Builder was amazing as he's easily capable of popping everything, especially once we put his turrets at the very back of the track. But an amazing perk of getting him first was that his main attack was stunning ZOMGs in range of the Ultra Juggernaut and Pirate Lord, letting them get tons of pops in the process. This worked great as we had no issue dealing with the rounds in a timely manner, and the Master Builder was sharing the damage. To take advantage of this, we got down some more tier 5 towers that'll become Paragons in the future. We got a Grand Saboteur that was constantly sabotaging, an Archmage and Permacharge up front, and a Master Bomber and Glaive Lord near the back. This reserved the spots for each Paragon and let them do some damage while we placed down the totems. This went on for about 30 rounds, where we finally had enough totems to build our second Paragon of the day, and we chose to do the Navark. Normally, this guy is skipped because he insta-kills so many blimps, but we've gotten to a point where the bads are tanky enough that the other towers will still get plenty of pops even if the Navark pulls in everything else, and the Grand Sabo will constantly be racking up the damage with his ability that hurts blimps when they enter the map. Fast forward to round 195 and we got our next Paragon, this one being the Ascended Shadow, as he was the only one with enough pops to get to degree 100 in such little time. Thank you, Grand Sabo. But this Ascended Shadow now means all of our towers get camo detection, as well as making every balloon spawn with 25% less health and everything but bads move 50% slower. So the late game just got a lot easier. At this point, I'm more focused on beating the rounds quickly and placing totems than I am on getting pops on our future Paragons. This is because it'll be nearly impossible to make our current Paragons not do most of the damage, so we might as well focus on what we can control. That being said, the Apex Plasma Master is up next, and I put all of his tier 5 upgrades up front to make sure they'd be attacking the entire time. Annoyingly, his pop count was what limited us the most. It took 37 totems to make him a degree 100, which we got at the end of round 231. Pretty brutal that it took that long, but there's not much more we could have done. With these 4 Paragons down, we should be safe for a while, but will it last long enough to get enough totems down? Hopefully, the final 3 Paragons don't take 37 rounds apiece, as we'd be halfway through the 300s by the time we'd get the final one. But now it's time to work on the Magus Perfectus. And this one was fun because we could place 402 arcane spikes on the outside of the bushes, and they could shoot in to get some extra pops. I made sure to perma brew them and watch them rack up the damage. While they didn't do much compared to the tier 5s, their damage clearly helped, as we only needed 31 totems this time to max it out, getting a perfect Magus Perfectus on round 263. And now we only have 2 Paragons left to build, the Glaive Dominus and the Goliath Doomship. This whole time I planned on getting the Goliath Doomship last, as aces take up so much space I thought I'd need to sell the farms to get enough of them down, but with our ice monkeys in the bottom left, we have enough space for all 100 upgrades. Additionally, you may have noticed that we've had a perma-brewed Flying Fortress since round 219, and you guessed it, he's over the 16.2 million pop mark, meaning we only need 20 totems to make him a degree 100. So that's the plan. Get a maxed out Goliath Doomship, as that'll give our boomerangs 20 more rounds to rack up some pops. This plan went off without a hitch, and we managed to get a perfect Aegon on round 283. Unfortunately, we weren't able to make this map the exact shape of any of his flight patterns, but I figured that if we optimize the map for every other Paragon and set this guy to Wing Monkey, we'd do better than the other way around. Plus, we'd get to target his airstrike right down the middle of the entire map, which will do insane amounts of damage. Now all that's left is the Glaive Dominus. We've had his tier 5s for many rounds, and it still took 42 totems to max this guy out. It was around 325 that we sold our farms, placed down a ton of turbocharges, and made our final degree 100 Paragon of the day. Then we put a Super Brittle right next to our Navarch and a Cripple Mob in the bottom right of the track. This way our Paragons will do a bit more damage. I thought about getting a Glue Storm, but there's already so much going on the screen that the constant raining of glue would make my recording even blurrier, so we opted to skip him. Finally, we moved Geraldo to the start of the track and got all 4 of his bunnies, as these are sometimes referred to as the Bunny Paragon. While I doubt they'll make a difference of even a single round, I couldn't exclude this guy. Additionally, I had TechBot set up on the Ace to constantly bomb, the Navarch to pull in bads, and the Master Builder to constantly replace his sentries, as we want those explosions going off as much as possible. And with this, we hit play and let her run. It was super cool to see the fortified bads getting popped in less than 1 pass, and the second the bad layer broke, we would permastun everything inside with the Master Builder and push them back towards the entrance with the Glaive Dominus. This quick popping didn't last long though, as it only took until round 350 for the fortified bads to make it 2 whole laps around the track. Still under 10% of the way through the track, but these rounds are where the Bloon stats start ramping up really fast. Here, Bloon's health increases by 150% every round, their speed increases by 2% each round, and the stun effects only last half as long. Luckily, these are all linear, as the percent increase is based on round 80, not on the previous round. This starts increasing even more once we get to round 401, as their health now increases by 250% every round. We were still popping anything under bads on the first pass, as we could permanently stall them until popped, but the bads kept getting farther and farther. The furthest one got on round 401 was 3.5 laps, and the crazy thing is that these bads already have 244 times their normal health, meaning the fortified ones on this round had 9.76 million health each. I let this run overnight, as each round was taking forever and we're clearly going to live for quite some time. It took 4 hours and 9 minutes for us to go from round 401 to 501, and here the Bloons are at 496.5 times their normal health, and they get their final scaling boost as they now gain 500% health each round. It was super hard to track how far they got, as there were so many bads on the screen, but I think the farthest a fortified bad made it was 10 laps around. Fast forward 11 constant hours of gameplay, and we finally got to round 601. Here the Bloons have 996.5 times their normal health, and there were so many bads on screen that it was impossible to track how many laps they completed, especially since some would be 3 laps in while new ones were just entering the map. One thing that was easy to track though was that this round alone lasted 8 minutes and 54 seconds. It was cool seeing just how fast the bads were though, as they were moving about 13 times faster than normal. We trucked on for over 2 more hours where we came across round 622. The sheer number of bads was insane and our paragons did their best, but after 6 minutes and 25 seconds of non-stop attacking, a fortified bad finally leaked. Hats off to these paragons as they racked up billions of pops against the bloons they faced this run, and it took a fortified bad that had 1101.5 times its normal health and 13.4 times its normal speed to get through. If you're wondering, this bad had 44,060,000 health, making it tankier than Elite Bloonarius. But the final pop counts on the paragons were crazy. Geraldo and his bunnies had 68 million damage, the NFT hit its cap of being worth $10 million, the Apex Plasma Master did 90 billion damage, the Magus Perfectus had 27 billion, the Super Brittle did 23 million, the Navarch of the Seas dealt 186 billion, the Glaive Dominus finished with almost all 2s at 22.222 billion damage, the Ascended Shadow did 96 billion, the Master Builder did 31.9 billion, the Cripple Mobe did 20 million, and the Goliath Doomship did 61 billion damage. No surprise that the Navarch did the most, since it can one-shot bads with its ability and constantly pulls in ZOMGs and below with its passive hooks, but it was wild that it almost doubled the damage of the second place Paragon, which was the Ascended Shadow. But on a near perfect map, these Paragons made it to round 622. We have the new Spike Factory Paragon in BTD6 called the Mega Massive Munitions Factory. We'll see how it changes with each degree, how it handles Elite Bloonarius, and how it does in free play. And at the end, we'll decide how strong it is. We'll start with how it looks every 20 degrees. At its lowest, degree 1, I was pleasantly surprised. It has the base of the Permaspike, the purple and green coloring of the Carpetus spikes, and the tubes and skull of the Super Mines. Already, it looks like a true Paragon, and we haven't even gone into its attacks yet. Instantly, spikes grow all over the track that deal constant damage to bloons that pass through them, similar to the Spirit of the Forest. It puts down super spiked balls that repeatedly explode when bloons pass over them, and when they run out of pierce, they split into several spike piles. Additionally, it has 2 abilities. The first drastically increases its attack speed for a short time, and the second places several mines throughout the track. These mines are much stronger than the others, create massive explosions when hit, and also split into a few spike piles after exploding. On to the degree 20. Its tubes get a bit thicker, they get braced at the bottom where they connect to the ground, and it gets 2 tubes that point up towards the sky. The degree 40 changes the color scheme a bit. Instead of all purple, the tubes become gray with purple accents, and the spikes up top get much larger and darker. The degree 60 adds 2 more tubes pointed up, changes their color again, this time making them gray and red, and adds spikes to the tubes as well. The degree 80 adds much more red to the design, including adding red spikes to the tubes, changes the green skull to a red one, and adds green gears behind the skull. And the degree 100 stays the same. I put them side by side and could not tell a difference. Maybe I'm overlooking something, but it looks great either way. What surprised me though was the increase in damage. The degree 20 Spacked Gun did about 1 million damage to the Ghost Moab, while the degree 100 did 2.4 million in about half the track and popped this new test balloon. I did not see that coming. But enough of Sandbox. On to fighting Elite Bloonarius with this new Paragon. We challenged him to a fight on Monkey Meadow and did the standard farming. We had a few marketplaces and a bank for the tier 1 fight, which we beat with a Sticky Bomb and Glaive Ricochets. We had a Minneapolis, a BRF, and Central Markets going into the tier 2 fight, which we beat with a Glaive Lord and Mad, and the tier 3 fight is where things got interesting. We were filling out the map with farms and grinding pops on our Spike Factory. We defended the rounds with a Carpet of Spikes and Boomerangs, and while we popped the tier 3 boss with a Glaive Dominus, we put down a Super Mines to get more pops on our next Paragon. This popped it rather easily, but we had a huge save up for the next fight. The Mega Massive Munitions Factory is the second most expensive Paragon, coming in at 800k, second only to the Goliath Doomship, so we have a ways to go. We sold the Glaive Dominus, made a massive Monkeyopolis, and filled out the map with BRFs. This gave us over $2.5 million to work with by the time the tier 4 boss came. We used all the Spike Storm abilities we had as he spawned to get a few more pops in our towers, and this let us build a degree 60 Spactagon. Bloonarius was right on top of him, and instantly he started doing millions of damage. Even without having time to pre-place mines, he was shredding the boss boss and all the Bloons he spawned. It looked like this was going to be a pretty easy popping, but then we used both abilities. The faster attack speed was letting him blow through the Bloons, and you could see massive chunks in damage every time one of his mega mines went off. And by the end of round 102, we popped Bloonarius. And that leaves us with just the tier 5 fight. I figured a degree 60 Spectagon is probably on the upper end of what people will be getting in boss events if you're building it for the tier 4 fight. So we left it here to see how it does against the tier 5. We had plenty of money to back it up with more, but we sold everything and tech botted the Spectagon to use its abilities as much as possible. I was excited to see how it would do since it had so many mines down, but then I remembered the recent change to bosses. Now all the spikes time out when a boss spawns to limit the insta-kills in ranked events. So as Bloonarius came out, all of his super mines exploded into purple and black spikes. It's still a ton of damage on the track, just not as much as it could have been. And these were either used or timed out before we even hit the first skull, so it was a huge waste of potential. Luckily, his attack speed ability was ready, letting us replace several of the mines before too much made it to the center. The Bloons spawns were using all of their pierce pretty quick though, especially once we hit the first skull and more Bloons came than normal. We were keeping up, but the spike piles were getting a bit thin. This got a little better as Bloonarius went around the first loop, and we used his attack speed ability again, refilling the center. But when Bloonarius went through the middle, he took a bunch of mines out with him. This did a ton of damage, bringing him down to about half health, but our spike count is low and Bloonarius is on the second loop, almost to the end of where our Spectre can damage him. As he was nearing the end of this loop, we finished round 126, letting us use the attack speed ability again. It looks like we can only use this once per round, and this time it worked out perfectly. As he went below the Spectagon, we did tons of damage, even hitting the second to last skull, but the Bloons inside the fortified bads made it through. We just didn't have many spikes near the end of the track, so once they got past our Paragon, it was pretty free. Don't worry though, we ran it back with Geraldo and had a degree 100 Spectagon up and running for the tier 5 fight. Not the most realistic for boss events, but I wanted to see how it'd do. Going into this, we had way more spiked balls down. Either it has more attack speed than the degree 60, or more of them survived the rounds because less were needed to pop the Bloons. Either way, the first half of the track was covered in black and purple nails when Bloonarius spawned, and we refilled the balls quickly with his abilities. Instantly, we could see the increase in damage. I knew it'd be big, but this was crazy. Not only was he melting Bloonarius, but way less of his spikes were needed for the Bloon spawns, letting us constantly have a good amount of spikes in reserve. We got to refill our spike piles a bit when Bloonarius was up top, and this let our Spectagon absolutely shred the final few skulls when he came back in range. A dominating victory for the new Paragon, and it was fun to watch. I mean, some Paragons don't look like they're doing as much damage as they are, but this one made it look like he did all 65 million damage, which you love to see. But that leaves us with just one more test, the solo free play run that we do with every Paragon on this channel. We booted up Cubism and made a degree 100 munitions factory on round 109, and to keep things consistent between Paragons, we gave him a tech bot. As you could expect, nothing made it too far. These spikes that grow on the track can pop anything weaker than super ceramics before they even get on screen, and not even walls of ZOMGs were getting through the first spiked ball. We'll fast forward to round 140 where, oh, the fortified bad layer popped off screen. I don't know if we somehow had a spike up there or what, but the normal bad that followed made it to the center, so something funky happened. Either way, the normal bad didn't make it past the first spike, so I think we're good for a while. Eventually, the Bloons started making it into the track though, like in the 160s where they'd routinely make it to the spike factory. He'd always catch up on them when either of his abilities were used, but it was undeniable that the Bloons were getting further. This continued to the 190s where the Bloons made it to the turn for the first time. Round 192, several bads and ZOMGs went all the way around the first triangle, taking out most of his spikes in the middle of the map. And unfortunately for us, this was kind of the new norm. While not every round made it this far, it wasn't out of the ordinary for Bloons to get around this triangle. This made me scared for round 200, but we actually did pretty well. These fortified bads are usually run enders or very difficult, but we popped them around the same spot as previous rounds. But from here, we'll be facing fortified bads all the time, and the Bloons get faster and stronger. I'm talking plus 2% speed and plus 35% health of their base stats with every round. As the Bloons got further and further, we got more and more reliant on the Spectagon's second ability. These mines that get placed throughout the track deal massive damage, and once the Bloons get through the middle, we needed them to clean up. This would normally give us the time to place down a few spiked balls for the next round, but the Bloons kept getting through. And on round 231, several blimps leaked. Even with us using both abilities, we weren't able to hold off this round, but a score of 231 is amazing, even beating out the Goliath Doom ship that made it to 202. Overall, the SPECT gun seems very strong and deserves its high price tag. It dominated free play, has a great design, and did well against the boss. The only downsides are that its mines explode at the start of each tier, limiting its damage right off the bat. And it's pretty tough to grind pops on this factory. Sure, you can defend with a carpet of spikes or a super mines, but it doesn't have a cheap way to either generate money or defend the rounds. If you can get around that hurdle though, it seems like a very strong addition to our Paragons. We're going to get a max degree tack shooter Paragon and see how far it can go. We'll be playing on balance, as the Bloons will have to circle around the Takagon 3 times before leaving. Now, to get a degree 100 Paragon, we'll need lots of pops on some tack shooters, plenty of Paragon totems, and tons of money. So we spent the first 100 or so rounds getting farms all around the map, loading the top and bottom with totems, and defending the center with our 3 tier 5s and a village. This put most of the pops on the tack shooters and let us comfortably coast until it was time to make the Paragon around 123. The first thing I noticed was how different it looked from the announcement trailer. Just like the other Paragons, it must change appearances based on its degree, as ours was red and black with blue flames, and the trailer's was black and silver with orange flames. Just off looks alone, it's worth it to max out the Crucible of Steel and Flame, especially with the cool skull being in the blue flames up top. The second thing I noticed was how large its range was. I was expecting it to reach just past the circle on balance, but it was making it about halfway to the hedges, which was a very nice surprise. And when we activated its ability that gives it extra range and pierce, the constant Maelstrom was making it all the way to the outskirts of the map. Honestly, balance was the perfect map to do this on, as it was so satisfying. This thing tore through the first few rounds, and I was ready to let it run free. I turned on auto start and watched its main attack rip through oodles of ZLMGs, but then round 126 came with DDTs. I totally forgot that this guy doesn't have camo detection, as they just marched through the map, causing us to lose. I used our free continue and thought of ways to give it camo detection. Because it's a Paragon, we can't buff it with a village or ETN, so that leaves us with a couple options. The first is to give it an Ascended Shadow, which does work, but I didn't want to see how far the Ninja Gun and Takagon could get. I wanted to see how strong this new Paragon was on its own. So after a couple rounds of having the Ninja Paragon down, I got rid of him and bought an Energizer. This, plus a couple Signal Flare mortars, was the best camo detection option I could think of, as they should be able to decamo everything in the middle while also not doing enough damage to help the Crucible beat a round it'd normally lose to. But with these down, I comfortably sat back and watched him rip through the rounds. It didn't matter what Bloon was sent his way, even fortified ZMGs were getting popped down to nothing as they entered the circle. DDTs were popped the moment the Takagon could see it, and everything else was a non-factor. That is, until the bads came on around 140. We popped the fortified one about 1 lap around the center, but what worried me were the DDTs inside. This time we popped them just fine, but in the future it might be hard for us to decamo them in time, especially if there are tons of Bloons around. But now it was time for our Crucible to take on the random rounds. From here on out, the rounds can consist of just about anything except for fortified bads. But this just means we'll be facing a mixture of DDTs, an insane number of blimps, and a few bads, really testing this guy's pierce and damage. But I don't have much to say for a bit, so we'll just put this in fast forward until we start using his abilities. Now, the Bloons have been slowly getting farther and farther as their health and speed scales with every round, and eventually it was too much for our Crucible to handle. On round 172, some ceramics from inside a bad managed to leak, but we still have his abilities to start using, so we used to continue, gave him a tech bot, and hit play. This will use both of his abilities whenever they're off cooldown. The first, Meteor Impact, calls down a meteor that does insane damage in a small area, and the second gives the Crucible extra range, pierce, and a new high pierce flame attack that erupts out of the Paragon. These should make the rounds much easier. The extra range popped everything but the bads early, essentially leaving the middle to only the purple whales. And that's when we called in the meteor. This massive crater popped all 3 of the bads in the center, leaving us with just 1 injured one to take out, and our Crucible did that no problem. This turned into a trend as we kept popping everything but bads with the main attack, and the Meteor Impact would take out these tanky guys. It was very fun watching this meteor clean up the center time and time again, but whenever it was on cooldown, the bads would march through the map. And on round 179, something leaked again. The camos inside the final bad didn't get revealed soon enough, and some ceramics leaked. Now, I wasn't willing to lose due to camo detection, so I got down 2 more signal flares and gave them all different attack speeds. I mixed it up with Berserker Brews, Jungle Drums, and Stronger Sims to make sure their attacks would be offset, giving us the highest odds of decamoing right away. And this actually made the difference. We popped the DDTs right after breaking the bad's outer layer. But round 180 was a different story. We used the abilities to pop the bads as they came in, but the final one was too much. We popped the DDTs inside right away, but the normal balloons are what got through, as several ceramics and Moabs were barreling towards the exit when we lost. So round 180 is where a max degree Crucible of Steel and Flames loses on balance. I got early access to the sub Paragon, and we're going to use it to beat Elite Bloonarius on the new map Sulphur Springs. We need to cover what this Nautic Siege Core does though to know how to use it. When on the surface, the sub has vision of everything any of your monkeys can see, just like advanced intel on a normal submarine. Additionally, it fires a stronger version of preemptive strike missiles at every balloon that spawns, even if it's just a lowly red balloon. Then you can submerge this guy and he will deal aura damage in his radius, just like the Energizer, but he will also provide damage and pierce buffs to all heroes and subs inside his range. I mean, even a 200 submarine was dealing over 40 damage per shot with this on him. Additionally, he keeps the Energizer's cooldown reduction buff while submerged, and this even affects Paragons. Yes, Paragons. I tested it a bit and found that it reduced the cooldown of the Master Builder's Sentries by 12.5%, the Navarch's Hook by 11%, and the Magus's Arcane Metamorphosis by 9%. I assume these are all custom and can be changed individually by Ninja Kiwi, but none of them got shorter when making a higher degree Nautic Siege Core. Finally, he has an ability called Final Strike. This ability makes the sub wait idly for 15 seconds while he prepares to fire a few missiles. They deal absurd damage as well as leaving radioactive material behind on the track that continues to damage balloons that pass over it. But with that, let's jump into this new map. There is a path of lava that the balloons follow and 3 islands in the middle of it. The balloons loop around each of these islands once, giving us plenty of time to pop them on their way to the exit. Plus, there's lots of space for us to make money, whether that be boats or banana farms. We started with our free Dart Monkey and Geraldo. This let us get his action figure around 6 and a farm up and running on round 12. But this is where our defenses started to fail, especially with tough rounds like 14 and 15 coming up. So we really had 2 choices. Either we could get down a submarine near the start, or we could get one of Geraldo's shooty turrets. Naturally, we went with the latter because I wanted to see if it could fit on the ring bordering the pool, and it totally did. There's a surprising amount of space up there. But this plus a balloon trap carried us all the way to the first tier of Bloonarius. We sold all our farms, got a tax zone, embrittlement, and a couple boomerangs at the end of the track. This gave them plenty of time to pop any rushes that headed their way, especially since we gave them a Berserker Brew. Then all we had to do was wait for Bloonarius to complete his loop around the first little island, and our tax zone took him out in the middle of round 44. We sold these defenses and started our mid-game farming. This consists of 2 balloon traps, a Monkeyopolis, a BRF, an overclock, and something to pop the mob, and a destroyer was perfect for the job. I've never defended with him before, but I could place it in the perfect spot to pop the blimp layer and let the ceramics loop back around to the balloon trap. Accidental perfection. Then we just filled most of the map with marketplaces and central markets while we waited for round 60. Here we just defended with a Mad and Glaive Lord, overclocking the Mad whenever possible. This popped the tier 2 on round 64, giving us plenty of time to farm away. But we did something I've never done before. I started defending with submarines because I wanted to start getting pops on these guys for when we make the sub Paragon. So I filled the center of the map with subs and placed BRFs basically everywhere else. This brings us to round 79, and we had a decision to make. Here, I normally get a budget Paragon in a degree 20 Glaive Dominus, but I got a tip that the Apex Plasma Master is amazing on this map as the entire track is surrounded by obstacles. So we got a bunch of 022 Dart Monkeys to get the 100 upgrades sacrificed, and shortly after Bloonarius spawned, we had enough money to make our Paragon. At first, I was sad it was only a degree 36, but once I couldn't see the lava anymore because of all the snowballs, I was okay. This popped Bloonarius in just a few seconds, and we even had fast forward off. Kinda crazy how well he worked on this map. To let our subs get more pops though, we sold the Apex Plasma Master and continued on. We filled the map with submarines, and most importantly, Paragon Totems. Twitch chat knows how bad I am at remembering to place these, but I only missed a couple, which is really good for me. Anyway, we were sitting pretty for the round 100 boss, but I got a little greedy. Instead of making the Nautic Siege Core now and having it for the boss, what if we waited 2 rounds to complete the ring of totems around the central island? This also lets us make more money and get more pops to sacrifice to the Paragon, so it might be okay. So on round 102, after almost leaking, we sold the NFT and maxed out the sacrifices for the submarine, and we perfectly hit degree 80. beautiful. This thing instantly started shredding, and I wanted to put him on strong to focus Bloonarius, but we had almost no defenses at the end of the track, and tons of DDTs and fortified bads were heading that way, so we had to leave our massive submarine on first to make sure nothing leaked. This still popped him pretty quick, just not as fast as we could have. From here, we filled the map with Buccaneers because you know we're getting the Nav Arc to pair with this guy. So we put our siege core on submerge mode so our bucks could deal some damage, and we continued to place totems every round. But then I had an idea. What if we used Final Strike during this time when we don't need him attacking, just to see how much it does? The 15 seconds counted down, and the start of round 114 got obliterated. Every balloon was instantly destroyed, and the entire first circle was covered in radiation. Pretty cool to see, but it did steal quite a bit of damage from the Buccaneers. Oh well. After some balloons got pretty far in round 115, I unsubmerged the sub to prevent any leaks and coasted to the final boss. Here we sold everything and made a Nav Arc of the Seas. It's a massive degree 77, but I'd be lying if I wasn't disappointed that it didn't make it to degree 80 along with our submarine. Then we prepared everything we needed for an Apex Plasma Master near the back of the track and purchased a Cripple Mob and Super Brittle for a little extra support. This left us with enough money to make a degree 50 Dart Paragon, which will lock up the back and prevent any leaks. But here is tier 5 Bloonarius versus our Nautic Siege Core, Nav Arc of the Seas, and Apex Plasma Master. Not bad. 35.9 million damage on our degree 80 Nautic Siege Core to take down Bloonarius on the new map Sulphur Springs. We are testing all 10 Paragons to see how strong they really are. We'll start with the weakest, degree 1 Paragons, and work our way up to maxed out degree 100s. And we're playing on a special map that's perfect for this, but more on that later. Paragons are the ultimate balloon poppers in BTD6, made by combining all 3 top upgrades of a tower to make one Mega Monkey. Currently, there are 10 in the game. Usually getting more than a few of these in one run is tough, but because we're starting off with degree 1s, it shouldn't be too bad. All we have to do is fill the map with boats and farms so we make extra money every round, get all the tier 5 monkeys we need, and combine them into Paragons. We started with the brand new Spike Factory Paragon on round 69. On top of the 3 monkeys, it costs $680,000, but boy is it worth it. The Mega Massive Munitions Factory fills the map with spikes that deal passive damage, lays down super mines right next to it, and has 2 abilities. The first increases its attack speed for a short time, and the second shoots small mines around the track that do tons of damage when balloons hit them. And this map makes the balloons loop around 23 times, giving him plenty of time to build a wall of spikes each round. Next, we got the Nautic Siege Core on round 74. This submarine Paragon can deal tons of damage, but we're actually going to submerge it. When underwater, he gives other Paragons 10% shorter cooldowns, which will add up once we have all of them down. Plus, we can still use his ability that, after a 15-second charge-up time, launches 3 missiles that do tons of damage and leave radiation on the track, further damaging the balloons. And while these are expensive, we're making over 100k a round, letting us get the Paragons up pretty quick. We followed these guys with the Goliath Doomship and Master Builder, the Monkey Ace, and Engineer Paragons. The Ace is the most expensive in the game, coming in at $765,000, so it was nice to get out of the way. And it's such a big tower that I wanted to make sure we could fit it inside the Subagon's range to get that shorter cooldown. Its ability lets us carpet bomb the screen, so we want that going off as often as possible. As for the Engineer, he has 2 important things going for him. The first is that he gets extra attack speed with every passing round, so we want to get him down early and he'll be much better later on. This does reach a cap eventually, but it'll take a while for him to get there. And the second thing the Master Builder has are his sentries. We're going to be placing them constantly as they are the bulk of his damage, and they give off massive explosions when sold or replaced. After that, we made the Magus Perfectus, the Wizard Paragon. This is the most complicated one in the game as we have to manage his mana and time his abilities. Luckily, we won't need to do that until the balloons are getting far, so we'll just let him do his thing until then. In the meantime, we built the Glaive Dominus. This Boomerang Paragon is one of the cheaper ones, but provides some nice stalling with its knockback ranks and has decent damage overall. And just like that, it's round 99 and we have over half the Paragons. The next one up is the Apex Plasma Master. We slotted him in the last opening on the right that's still inside the Subagon's range. If you're wondering why the map is enclosed in hedges, the Dart Paragon is why. He shoots spiked balls that bounce off obstacles and they can re-hit balloons. So when he's on a map that's fully enclosed like this one, his DPS skyrockets. Technically, he doesn't have to be in range of the Subagon since he doesn't have abilities, but we want him in the middle of the map so he attacks as often as possible. But this long repeating oval surrounded by hedges will let him hit every balloon with each attack, whether they're in first or just spawning into the map. As for the left side of the water, we put down the the Ascended Shadow and Crucible of Steel and Flame. The first is the Ninja Paragon that'll do a surprising amount of damage. While he specializes in popping camos and bosses, he has a passive that'll rack up the damage in free play. He makes every Bloon spawn with 25% less HP, making the Bloons later on much more poppable. And the second is the Tack Shooter Paragon. He needs to be inside the range of the Subagon because he has two abilities. The first increases his Pierce, projectile lifespan, and produces an aura of blue flames that damage nearby Bloons, and the second launches a massive meteor. And we made sure to put him in the middle of the track so his attacks will hit as many Bloons as possible. But that only leaves one Paragon left. The Navarch of the Seas, one of the best Paragons in the game, known for its insane damage, great ability, and how easy it is to get high degrees. Every dollar generated by our boats down bottom increased the power of this Paragon, so we actually had to sell all our boats in the water to make a degree 1 Navarch. Otherwise, he would have been in the 70s. But we got this final Paragon on round 114. Instantly, we can see why I have a habit of building the Navarch last. On top of wanting extra degrees from making money with Buccaneers, he has passive hooks that one-shot ZOMGs and below. This is great for clearing rounds, but getting pops on monkeys that'll become a Paragon is one way to make it a higher degree. And because the Navarch pulls them in, he steals a ton of potential damage other monkeys could be doing. For this run though, it's just nice that he's beating the round so quickly. And he has an ability that fires an upgraded hook strong enough to pull in bads. This can be used twice per round, but it makes him incredibly strong for challenges like this, where we see how far into free play they can go. But after a couple rounds of letting our Paragons run, we put down some tech bots so they're constantly using their abilities. The only one we left off was the Magus Perfectus, as we'll just micro the wizard once the extra damage is needed. With auto start on, we were plowing through each round in just a matter of seconds. The Navarch would pull blimps in until it hit its limit, and the rest would be popped down to nothing by our other Paragons. This performance was so brutal that the Apex Plasma Master didn't even fire a shot until round 185, where a bad finally made it inside its range. And even then, it only fired a few times. This was the first time a Bloon had made it a quarter of the way through a single lap, putting it at just over 1% of the way through the map. I was excited to see our Paragons face tougher Bloons, and the first real challenge is round 200, where we face 2 fortified bats. This is the round that ends a ton of free play challenges, but the Navarch made it way too easy. We just used his big hook the moment each of them spawned, and we were off to the 200s. Here, we'll be facing normal and fortified bads just about every round, and the Bloons will be getting faster, stronger, and more resistant to stuns as we go. Even with that, it took until round 257 for a Bloon to complete a single lap. Here, it was a fortified bad, meaning there were 2 before it that the Navarch pulled in. But this blimp has 48.5 times the normal health and was moving 6.1 times faster than normal. And still, it was only 5% of the way through the map. And we're going until we leak. It didn't take much longer for Bloons to regularly complete a lap though. On round 281, even the normal bads were doing it, and the fortified one in the back made it 2 laps in. This went on for hours. I let this run when I went to bed, when I was at a tournament, at the gym, you name it. And our Paragons were popping Bloons the entire time, making them look bad. I mean, if we just pick a random round, 359. We can watch our towers pop anything that aren't bads right away. The Master Builder and Glaive Dominus kept them in place until they were gone, and then it was just purple whales swimming in ovals. There were about 20 of them that I could see, and a fortified bad was leading the pack. What's nice is we can always tell what one's in first because the Ascended Shadow Sticky Bomb will always attach to it. But after about 5 laps, these blimps started popping. And while it doesn't look too bad in post, we sped up this footage a ton to make it watchable. But even in the mid 300s, we weren't scared of leaking. The 400s though, those were a different story. Each round took several minutes as the Bloons would complete lap after lap before being popped, and I just let my computer run. Until round 466. Instantly, 7 bads forced their way into the map, and several smaller blimps spawned with them. As usual, we took out the little ones no problem, but more bads kept coming in. Because they overlapped, I'm not sure how many there were, but most of the track was covered in these purple whales. We whittled them down, but just didn't have enough time. There were only 4 remaining when one got through, so we bought a continue and tried again, this time microing the Magus Perfectus. All I really did was make sure the Wizagon had max mana anytime his Arcane Metamorphosis came off cooldown. This turns off his Phoenix and consumes 4,000 mana per second, but gives the wizard a powerful flame attack that deals way more damage than usual, and it ends once he runs out of mana. I wasn't sure how much of a difference this would make, but it was enough to beat the round. I assumed the Bloons were still very close to leaking, but when we broke open the final fortified bad, he had at least another lap to go before leaving. With this micro, we were able to beat the next round as well, but 468 took us out. Even with the extra damage, the bads were too much, so the wizard's abilities bought us 2 extra rounds. At this point though, the Bloons had 411.5 times health and 10.32 times speed, meaning each bad had 8.23 million health, and the fortified ones had double that. But after several minutes of them going round and round, a couple made it to the end, finishing the Degree 1's run. But here are some fun stats. The Apex Plasma Master dealt 4.1 billion damage, the Magus Perfectus 2.5 billion, the Master Builder 2.9, the Nautic Siege Core 1.3, the Navarch 29.7 billion thanks to its hooks, the Spactagon dealt 5.6 billion, the Crucible of Steel and Flame 1.5, the Ascended Shadow had 10, and the Glaive Dominus dealt 2 billion damage. But now we're going to do this again with stronger Paragons, this time with Degree 20s. In addition to looking cooler every 20 degrees, Paragons get a massive power spike here. So we're going to do this with Degree 20s, 40s, 60s, 80s, and 100s to see how much better they get with each jump in power. Luckily for us, getting Degree 20s is pretty simple. All we need are the 3 Tier 5 monkeys and to add in some pops, other upgrades, or extra money. So after filling out the map with boats and farms like last time, we built the Master Builder. The 2 Tier 5s up front had dealt some damage, and we placed several 0-2-3 engineers around the map. And when we combined them all, we made a Degree 20 Engineer Paragon. Next, we set up the Goliath Doom ship, but because monkey aces are so big, we could only fit a few of them without selling the farms. This would have only been enough for a Degree 12 as is, so we invested an extra $190,000 into it to hit the Degree 20 mark. Normally, you can't see what degree the Paragon will be until after you make it, but I have the Useful Utilities mod by Doom Bubbles that makes challenges like this much easier to set up. Over the next handful of rounds, we'd make a Paragon whenever we had the money, placing them in the same spots we had the Degree 1s. Nothing eventful happened as we just popped every Bloon off screen, but through a ton of farming and grinding pops, we built our 10th Degree 20 Paragon on round 123. Just like last time, we saved the Navarch of the Seas for last, and we had to sell all but 2 of our flavored trades to not make it too strong. Then we set up the tech bots and let it run for a few days. At first, it looked very similar to the Degree 1's run. Nothing was making it far, and even the bads were getting popped quickly. I mean, the Apex Plasma Master didn't even shoot until round 202, and it wasn't until round 261 that a Bloon finished a single lap, 4 rounds after the Degree 1's. Now, I wasn't sure if this meant the Degree 20s would last exactly 4 rounds longer, or if this would compound because it's such a long map. We just had to wait and see. 4 hours later, we hit round 359 where we can compare the two. And as expected, the Degree 20s were significantly faster. Here, the bads are being popped about 5 laps in, whereas the Degree 1s were popping them in about 8 laps. I wasn't getting my hopes up though. In all of my free play runs, we're completely fine until the Bloons start making it super far out of nowhere. With the Degree 1s, it was the 400s when things started to spiral out of control. To my surprise though, these guys handled them just fine. The 430s that caused us trouble last time still took a while to beat, but they weren't even getting halfway through the map. And before I knew it, we were on round 468. The round that took us out last time even with Magus Perfectus Micro. It took 8.5 minutes, but our monkeys pulled through. But this is when it started to spiral. The rounds took so long and the Bloons were so tanky that it was impossible to tell how far they were getting. It was just a nerve-wracking event knowing that eventually something would leak and we didn't know when. But our Paragons just kept going. I knew there was a big power spike every 20 degrees, but this was wild. Our last run died in the 460s, and this one is pushing into the 500s. And while the rounds are randomized at this point in the game, we are guaranteed to face fortified bads every round, which are really the only Bloons we're scared of. But to make things worse, the 500s jump up the scaling to boost Moab class Bloons' health by 500% and their speed 2% every round. So on round 502, the Blimps have 501 times health and 11 times speed. And with this scaling came round 507. The one that finally got through. For the longest time, the map was filled with fortified whales. Slowly, we covered them in bandages, but they were just too much for our Paragons. When one finally leaked, there were still several left on the map, so it wasn't that close. That being said, it's time to buy a continue and micro the wizard. Now, I know this adds a ton of damage to our Megas, but I'm still shocked at the results. The extra damage was able to break open all the remaining bads on round 507, and we stunned the insides until they popped. But what's more impressive was we beat more than just this round. We beat all the way through 510 without showing signs of stopping. But there was one last free play adjustment we had to face. Round 511. The hardest Bloon group we could face starts spawning here. Stacks of 5 bads and 5 fortified bads with 0 spacing, guaranteed to spawn throughout the round to make it much harder. And boy, did we notice the jump in difficulty. They blew right through us, reaching the end with at least 15 bads still standing. But these Paragons lasted 43 more rounds than the Degree 1s, and we have much stronger ones coming later in the video. But these Bloons were nothing to laugh at. Fortified bads had over 21 million health, and is why our Paragons racked up so many more pops. On average, the Degree 20s did 2.23 times more damage than the Degree 1s, with the top two being the Navarch of the Seas and Ascended Shadow at 53.4 and 21 billion damage. Time to double the degrees and try out the 40s. But if you're enjoying the video, please use creator code HBOMB if you buy anything in-game. It helps us out a lot. This is where it starts to get difficult, as each Paragon will take quite a bit more money or pops to get the right amount of power. That being said, the ease of this map should allow us to do so. We'll just have to take farming a bit more seriously. On top of the usual boats and farms, we made a large Monkeyopolis, a tech-botted Monkeynomics, and we ultra boosted a Banana Central, all of which will make us more money per round. I thought this would give us a late start as we spent more time setting up the farms, but we actually made our first Paragon on the same round as usual, round 69. I don't know why it's been lining up this way, as I didn't even know it happened until we were making the video, but if nothing else, we're consistent. Anyway, we got as many pops on the XXXL trap as we could, filled the map with 024 engineers, and still had to invest an extra $529,000 to make the Master Builder a Degree 40. But this shows my favorite part about Paragons, how they look cooler the higher degree they are. Compared to a Degree 1, our Master Builder has a cool new chest piece and an orange visor instead of a blue one, and the changes get more drastic later on. But building him made me think. How much money we have to spend in the slider for higher degrees depends on the price of the Paragon itself. So a cheap one, like the Tachagon, gets way more power per dollar than an expensive one like the Spactagon, but all pops are created equal. So my thought was to make the cheaper ones right now with our money, and wait on the more expensive ones like the Goliath Doomship to let them rack up the pops. So after getting the Master Builder and letting him ramp up his attack speed with each round, we put down a Flying Fortress and Wizard Lord Phoenix to start damaging the Bloons while we work on other Paragons. The first of which was the Apex Plasma Master. We already had some pops on him because of the tier 5s up front, but he's especially easy to get extra degrees on because we're allowed 2 Crossbow Masters, his tier 5 upgrade of the bottom path. This is the only tier 5 in the game that we can get 2 of, as there's a monkey knowledge point that lets us do so, and extra tier 5 upgrades contribute a ton of power to Paragons. So on round 74, we made our Degree 40 Dartagon. Shortly after this, we prepped each Paragon by placing a tier 5 in their spots. This lets some get pops, like the Carpet of Spikes and Infernal Ring, and made sure all of them would be inside the range of the Subagon later on. But with how much money we were making per round, we were able to get a Degree 40 Paragon about every 5 rounds. I expected some to take much longer to save up for than others, but our pop farming seemed to work, especially since we were able to turn off the Phoenix of the Magus Perfectus so no Paragon was stealing pops. Instead, they were all going to our Carpet of Spikes or Flying Fortress. This let us get our last Paragon on round 117, 6 rounds earlier than our Degree 20s. We set up the tech bots and let them run free. And for almost 100 rounds, the Apex Plasma Master did nothing, just rotated in circles waiting for the Bloons to get to him. He waited 35 minutes for round 207, where a bad finally made it far enough for the Dartagon to get some shots off. It wasn't much, but from here on out, the Bloons would routinely make it far enough to enter his range. But you may notice that we're trying something new here. We also tech-botted the Magus Perfectus. I realized that if we used his abilities when they came off cooldown, his mana was typically pretty full, and this way we get to use his Phoenix Explosion and Arcane Metamorphosis abilities throughout the run. So you'll be seeing purple ZOMGs and BFBs floating backwards along the track. This adds quite a bit of damage at all stages and will help us speed through the easier rounds. Before I knew it, we were on on round 372 and our Paragons were firing on all cylinders. The normal bads were getting popped 1 or 2 rounds in, and their insides were frozen in place until extra attacks popped them down to nothing. And for the fortified bads, it depended on if they were being focused or not. The one in front lasted under 2 laps, while the one in the back broke open right after completing its 4th lap. The crazy thing is, this round lasted 3.5 minutes, and the Bloons are only making it 17% of the way to the exit. It's clear that these guys are killing it, so let's jump to the rounds that finished off our previous runs. Starting with 468. Already a super high round, and our degree 40s handled it no problem. Our Navark even made the mistake of using its upgraded hook to pull in a Moab instead of a bad at the start of the round, as none of the purple whales had spawned yet, but they still had more than enough damage to pop everything in time. Several fortified bads spawned this round, so it didn't make much of a difference. Only the Navark missed out on a ton of damage. Either way, our Paragons popped around with the fortified bads only getting about halfway through the map. Next, we have round 511, the round that ended our degree 20s and where stacks of 5 fortified and normal bads spawn with 0 spacing. Right off the rip, several bads poured onto the screen, and I could only assume several of them were stacked. We watched the ones in front get broken down to ZOMGs and still have bads underneath, so I couldn't count how many there were. But as the round went on, more and more bads came onto the screen. Even with several stacks out here, most of the track was covered in whales, and we could only tell what Bloon was in first because of the sticky bomb. But this is right around the time that it started to go downhill. In real time, we had no idea how far the Bloons were getting, especially since each round was taking over 10 minutes apiece. But after looking at the footage, we can say the Bloons made it about 2/3 of the way through the map before we popped them all. This gives us plenty of track to work with, but as usual, we won't have any way of knowing when a leak will happen. A Bloon will just exit eventually. The next 30 rounds, the Bloons got farther and farther, and our Paragons were racking up the damage. But then, round 545 came. The track was full of bads, and it was impossible to tell how far they were. Round and round they went, slowly being covered in bandages. These impossibly tanky blimps made their way through the track. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, they started to break down to ZOMGs. And as we know, we can permastall these. Before we knew it, there are only 4 bads left, all on their last stage before breaking open. But as they got to the bottom of the track, they turned to the exit instead of left for another lap, ending our run. We bought a continue and tried again. I had some hope for this one as our Navark pulled in a DDT at the start of the round when he was tech botted, but this time I'll be microing his hook and the Magus' abilities. This way, we'll have one less fortified bad to deal with. But the game was so laggy that it was very difficult to use the Magus. Even finding him was hard since the map was covered in bads, and it took several seconds for BTD6 to recognize my clicks, let alone maximizing his mana for Arcane Metamorphosis. So after a while, I put the tech bot back on him as it definitely does a better job than I can. But even with our Navark using better hooks, a bad made it to the exit. So the degree 40 score is round 545. Our Paragons had some obnoxious damage counts though. The APM dealt 19 billion damage, the Magus 18.8, Master Builder 10.5, the Subagon did 5, the Navark dealt 79.3 billion, the Spactagon did 18.3, Tachagon 8.5, the Ascended Shadow did 37.2, and the Glaive Dominus did 8.6 billion damage. Now, I don't know why I kept missing the Goliath Doomship, but based on mid-run numbers, he seemed to always deal about 50% more damage than the Magus Perfectus. So we can guess that he did about 28 billion damage. The degree 1s lasted 468 rounds, the degree 20s 511, and the degree 40s 545, making each jump in degrees last an average of 38.5 extra rounds. But now, it's time to try out the degree 60s, which are about how strong you'd want your Paragons to be for an elite boss fight. That being said, the fortified bads we just lost to have almost as much health as Elite Vortex, so I'm looking forward to this one. The only thing is getting degree 60s will be much more expensive and time consuming than the previous runs. You see, there are 5 ways of getting more power on your Paragons. We've covered most of them, like sacrificing extra tier 5 towers, getting more pops or generating money, spending extra money in the slider or on sacrificed monkeys, and merging non-tier 5 upgrades. The problem is, each one of these categories has a limit of how much power they can contribute to the Paragon getting made, so we can't just fill the map with cheap, low-tier upgrades for easy power. The 5th option, though, is unlimited. Paragon Totems. At level 20, Geraldo adds Paragon Totems to his shop, and each one placed adds 2,000 power to the next Paragon made. And there is no limit to how many we can sacrifice. The problem is, only one comes back in stock every round, and they're very expensive, coming in at $22,100. But that is still a great dollar to power ratio for more expensive Paragons, and it'll be good practice for getting the degree 80s and 100s. Anyway, we started off like normal, filling the map with farms, boats, and placing the 3 tier 5 engineers. But right after this, we spent $110,000 to level Geraldo up from 12 to 20, and we started buying his Paragon totems anytime they were in stock. This allowed us to build a degree 60 master builder on round 72, and man is he starting to look cool. Massive black gears are added to his shoulders, his front right hand is bright blue, and his claw turned from yellow to a deep orange. Next up, we built the Apex Plasma Master. Admittedly, we should have made this one without totems because of how cheap he is, but I was very inefficient with this one. We just got his extra crossbow master and invested 280k, getting him on around 79. For the Dartagon, the only real change in looks is adding some spikes to the front of his crossbow. But now, it's time to add a bit of strategy to how we make the rest of our Paragons. We started farming pops on the Ace Wizard and Spactory while we worked on a cheap one in the Crucible of Steel and Flame. It was pretty easy to do as we filled the map with overdrives to max out the upgrade sacrifices and then put $320,000 into the slider, getting it on round 87. Because of how crowded the runs have been, the only difference I could see between this guy and his degree 40 variant were the spikes up top turned from white to black, but I'm sure the base's appearance changed too. Moving on, we did something completely out of character. We built the Navark of the Seas. The boats had generated enough money to not need any Paragon totems or cash invested to make it a degree 60, so I figured this was the time. Plus, we can place down the flavored trades again and make even more money per round as the Navark buff stacks with the Trade Empire. As for looks, there's more red and green in his design than the last run, but the center is getting too busy to see all the changes, so we're going to fast forward to getting the final Paragon. Round 143, we sold all the boats and farms, placed a ton of aces up top, and put $750,000 into the slider to make a degree 60 Goliath Doomship. Luckily, this guy flies above the rest, so we can see that he gets 2 jet engines added to his design, many more yellow lights / windows, and the graffiti on his tail changed from a damaged balloon on each side to one right in the middle. And as we could have guessed, this stomped the next few hundred rounds. Now, so far we've checked out each Paragon set at a time, but it's getting kind of repetitive. Like, this one beats round X, the next beats round Y, over and over. So let's try something new. For these stronger degrees, I'll show it and 3 other runs on the rounds others have lost to, sped up with chill music. Just watch how much faster the higher degrees clear the rounds. I knew the stronger Paragons popped the rounds much faster than weaker ones, but it seemed like the higher degree Paragons I got, the slower my computer would run. So the rounds actually took longer for me in person. And now it's cool to watch them absolutely dust the weaker ones when we speed up the games to all be at the same pace. As for round 545, only the degree 40s had made it this far, so we'll compare them straight up. The degree 40s were very close to winning as I retried twice and only a single bad leaked. Because this was so close, I expected the degree 60s to crush it, but it took them 16.5 minutes to pop the round. And when the run was going on, I had no idea how far the Bloons had gotten. In post, I counted the furthest balloon getting 21 laps in, putting it at about 90% of the way through the map, meaning it wasn't an easy victory. Just 2.5 more laps and the monkeys will lose. You'd think this would only take a little bit, but this group made it 32 more rounds before losing. Here, Bads quickly filled the entire track, and we knew some of them were stacks of 5. Even with that, we whittled them down, and it was always fun to see the monkeys break a full stack down to just ZOMGs, letting us start to see the track again. But after several minutes, the Bads started to get through. There were at least 17 fortified ones left, so it would have been a miracle for the monkeys to beat this round. So round 577 did them in, even with a retry. But the purple whales were at a staggering 876.5 times health and 12.5 times speed, making each fortified bad have 35 million health, really letting our paragons rack up the damage. The Ascended Shadow dealt 56.7 billion, the Tachagon did 14.9, Spactagon 26.6, Navark 111.8, Nautic Siege Core 7.6, Goliath Doomship 39.8, Dartagon 30.4, Magus Perfectus 28.1, Master Builder 16.2, and the Glaive Dominus did 13.3 billion damage. Time to take this up a notch again. Degree 80 Paragons. We got off to a hot start, making our Navark of the Seas on round 56. This is the easiest one to get to degree 80 because of how much money we can make with early boats, and I wanted to see if the extra money we generate from the Double Trade Empire would be worth doing for the degree 100s. But the best part was seeing the Navark in all its glory. The captain now wears a white cap and a crown, the ship itself got more red, and the runway went from white to gray. From here, we did the usual, play some tier 5s to farm pops, buy a paragon totem every round, and work towards getting a master builder. This took us 25 totems and $1.4 million in the slider to build, but it looks cooler too. His visor turned green, he got some orange accents on his helmet, and his claw is now bright blue. But it's clear that this is going to take a while. Over the next 100 or so rounds, we made sure to place a totem every time one was in stock, and we built a degree 80 whenever possible, getting our 10th one, the Goliath Doomship, on round 214. And we had almost $11 million left over. There are only two things slowing us down for getting these paragons: pops and totems. Money was not an issue, so we learned that getting an early Navark is not the play. Something we already assumed, but it was good to test. Here, we got a great view of all the paragons. At degree 80, there are large changes in appearances. The Magus is now deep purple with a halo of stars around its hat, while its Phoenix gained an extra set of wings. The Subagon became a darker blue. The Apex Plasma Master got 4 nodes on top of its head. The Glaive Dominus now has green crystals on its hood, and the Goliath Doomship's front cannons got larger, and it added 1 large orange bulb on each wing. But we will jump straight to round 468, as there wasn't a single challenging round up to this point. What was surprising though was that our degree 80 paragons were popping the rounds at the same speed as the degree 60s. They finished rounds 468 and 469 at about the same time, so I'm not sure how much farther they'll get than last run. On the positive side, they did pop the balloons about twice as fast as the degree 1s. While they were leaking, the degree 80s were already on round 470. Next, we'll look at round 511, where the degree 20s lost, and there were two things that jumped out to me. The first was the degree 80s outpaced the 60s this time around. I figured this would be the case, and the reason round 468 was so close was because of the random balloon sends. The degree 60s must have gotten a much easier round than the 80s. The second thing I noticed was the huge difference between the 80s and 20s. The degree 80s were popping the final couple bads when the 20s were only starting to break open the first few. Things slowed down in the late 500s though. I really like looking at how our next group of paragons handles the round that beat the previous one. So let's watch round 577. Other than the Navark's hooks, it took about 12 laps for the degree 80s to start breaking down the fortified bads, and there were so many on screen that it took ages to get to them all. By the end, some of these purple whales had spent 15 minutes traveling 20 or 21 laps around our paragons. taking about 45 seconds per lap. But the degree 80s pulled through, with the Bloons getting about 90% of the way to the exit. With how far the Bloons were already getting and how close in damage these were to the degree 60s, I wasn't sure when it would end. But the trend of lasting over 30 extra rounds continued as these Paragons made it into the 600s. This is roughly where my Paragons lost last time I made them all degree 100s a year ago, but we had fewer Paragons back then. Anyway, it was round 608 that did them in. Even with a few retries, several bads made it to the exit. How we can beat the last round and leak a ton here, I don't know, but round 608 is a great score. And the top two damage dealers were the Navark of the Seas at 156 billion damage and the Ascended Shadow at 82 billion. But now it's time for the main event, the maxed out degree 100s, and we get to use all the lessons we've learned so far. Delay getting the Navark, farm pops on as many towers as possible, and get Geraldo to level 20 ASAP so we can get those totems down early. And by early, we did this by spending over $100,000 on round 56. After 53 totems and a couple million pops, we were able to make our first degree 100 Paragon of the day, a maxed out Master Builder. This took quite a long time, but the further we go, the easier it'll be to get pops on our monkeys. This category doesn't cap out until 16.2 million pops or $4.05 million generated, so we can get quite a bit of power as the rounds go on. As this gets easier though, getting Paragon totems will get harder and harder as the rounds only get tougher with time. The next Paragon we made was the Apex Plasma Master. We didn't have the best way of getting pops on him as the hedges block the start of the map, so we also put down a Flying Fortress and Wizard Lord Phoenix to help pop the Bloons. Really, my only goal is to pop them before they reach the Master Builder, as any pop that goes to him is wasted. That being said, as we made our way through the mid-hundreds, the Bloons were making it to the Enchagon. 47 totems later, we made the Apex Plasma Master. This guy is also on the right side of the map, so he won't be stealing many pops either unless the Bloons make it well into the map. Still, we're on round 154 and we only have 2 of 10 Paragons. The next one up is the Magus Perfectus, but it's much easier to get pops on as the Archmage and Phoenix can see the start of the map while the Prince of Darkness can spawn Bloons to insta damage them. With this, we were able to make the Magus after just 20 rounds, and even with having to dump millions of dollars into every Paragon, our current setup was making enough money to keep up with the demand. But now, more Bloons are spawning than before, so we placed a few tier 5s to start getting pops on the rest of the monkeys. We got a Grand Saboteur to damage the Bloons as they enter the map, all 3 Spectres, Tack Shooters, and Boomers to damage the Bloons as they pass, and we buffed them all with a Perma-Brew and Homeland Defense. This let us need very few totems for the next 6 Paragons. We only needed 23 for the Goliath Doomship, 21 for the Ascended Shadow, and the absolute minimum of 20 for the Navark, Spactagon, Glaive Dominus, and Crucible of Steel and Flame. Once we got the 9th Paragon, it was clear we had enough money for the Nautic Siege Core, but nowhere near enough pops or totems. Because the water was full of boats all game, we weren't able to farm pops on them. So we sold our bucks and filled the water with first strikes, using their abilities whenever possible. This gave them at least 10,000 damage per ability, letting us rack up the damage pretty quickly. And it only took us 31 totems to get a maxed out Subagon. So we got our 10th and final Paragon on round 329. Already well into free play, but nowhere near the rounds we'll be hitting with these towers. We made our way to round 468, where the degree 1s lost. But here, the degree 100s put on a show. It only took 2.5 laps to start popping the normal bads, and we took out the last fortified one 5.5 laps in, only a quarter of the way through the map. The next checkpoint is round 511, where the degree 20s lost. This is the first time that bads cover the entire map, and several of them are stacks of 5. Combine this with every blimp having 33% more health than round 468, and the bads actually lived for a bit. Normal ones made it 5 laps in before popping, and the last fortified one broke open after 10.5 laps, which is surprisingly fast considering it had 21.86 million health. On to round 545, the degree 40s last round. Each fortified bad had 28.66 million HP, almost 7 million more than 511. And even with millions of extra health and a little more speed, the Bloons only made it 12 laps in, about halfway through the map. Round 577, where the degree 60s lost, was pretty much the same. The fortified bads had about 7 million more health, and the last one made it 14 laps in before breaking down to DDTs and ZOMGs. (608), the round that beat the degree 80s. These Bloons have 1,031.5 times more health than normal, making the fortified bads come in at 41.26 million health, more than a tier 5 elite Bloonarius, so it's no surprise that it took several minutes to complete this round. The last bad made it 21 laps around the map, almost making it to the end. And the reason Paragons pop bosses so much faster than they are popping the Bloons here is because they get tons of extra damage to boss Bloons, so that 40 million health on Bloonarius gets dropped much faster than the bads here. Just like last time, I wasn't sure how much further the degree 100s would go as the Bloons were already making it 90% of the way through the map, but the trend continued. The 610s, 20s, and 30s all passed with me having no idea when we'd leak. But it finally came on around 644, 176 rounds after the degree 1 Paragons lost. Even with us microing the Navark of the Seas, 9 bads were still standing when one finally got through. But these Bloons had 1,211 times health and were moving 13.84 times faster than usual, meaning each fortified bad had 48.46 million health, leading to some insane damage counts. The Glaive Dominus dealt 27.2 billion damage, the Ascended Shadow 117.7, the Crucible of Steel and Flame 32.2, the Mega Massive Munitions Factory 53.7, the Nautic Siege Core 14.4, the Master Builder 32, the Apex Plasma Master 65.2, the Magus Perfectus 50.8, and the Navark of the Seas did an astounding 211.7 billion damage. But that was how far all the Paragons can get in a game of BTD6.